How you doing, Doc? Thank you so much for coming on to the Stop Chasing Pain podcast. It truly is an honor to have you on my show today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, we have a lot to talk about. We're talking about the
Good.
brain, which, is definitely could take more than an hour that we're going to spend together.
Yeah.
But your writings have been very influential for me because I've been into the brain like you, I guess, for a long period of time through my own kind of cognitive issues that I developed over the last several years and read all of your books. And we're going to touch on mainly one today, but also want to talk about the other. They're pretty relevant. But the book that we're going to talk about today is that Double X Brain, the groundbreaking science empowering women to maximize cognitive health and prevent Alzheimer's disease. So let's talk about that. I mean, what led you down the road to concentrate on this and write a book about it?
Well, I'm a neuroscientist. I'm a brain scientist by training, and I've been looking at brains for 20 years. I started as soon as I could. I was like maybe 19. And it's really in part because of my family history. So my grandmother, around the time that I was going to college, she started showing signs of cognitive decline. And later on, she definitely developed Alzheimer's disease and dementia, although she was not officially diagnosed, but she was like a textbook case of Alzheimer's disease. And a few years later, both her younger sisters also developed dementia, and all three of them actually died of Alzheimer's disease because they were very healthy physically, they were very strong physically, but it was like a 10-year struggle with this incredibly debilitating, mind-robbing disease. And obviously the impact on the family was huge. My mom was the primary caregiver, but everybody needed to, we really had to change our entire life to just accommodate this very strange situation and very strange event in our family. And so I started panicking for myself and for my mom. I was like, am I doomed? Am I going to get this? Is my mom going to forget who I am? And what is it? Why is this happening? Is it just me? That was my first question. Is it genetic? Am I doomed? If it's not just me, is it something that really women should hear about? Is it just my family? Is there a bigger lesson to be learned from this? And so I went back to, I was doing a PhD. I was just starting my PhD. At that point, I was studying neuroscience, so brain science, and nuclear medicine. I have a dual PhD. So I was really looking at the brain at that point with techniques and, positive emission tomography is what I do, but also MRI scans and all sorts of stuff. And I went to my supervisor, who was incredible. I mean, still today, he's like my absolutely best mentor. He knows everything. And so I went to him and I said, well, does it matter? Is it worse for women? Does Alzheimer's disease affect women more than men, worse than men? Does it hit us harder than men? And the answer back then was like, I don't know.
Right.
No one has looked into that, but the most logical explanation could be that women live longer than men. Alzheimer's disease is a disease of old age. And so it just makes sense that more women than men suffer from Alzheimer's disease, or that Alzheimer's would affect women harder than men. And it took a really long time and many years of research. A lot of my research is focused on this, and a lot of years just pushing back against this bias to show that, number one, women don't live that much longer than men. In the United States, the difference is 4.5 years, not 20. But most importantly, it turns out that Alzheimer's disease is not a disease of old age. It's a disease that manifests itself very obviously in the elderly, but starts with changes in the brain years and sometimes decades prior to cognitive symptoms, which completely changes the question around women's brains and Alzheimer's risk. And just recently, actually just 2 weeks ago, we published the first paper showing that women develop Alzheimer's disease earlier in their brains than men. and very specifically in midlife, in our 40s and 50s. So we're really changing the way that people are thinking about gender and Alzheimer's disease. And now I realize that I talk for like 10 minutes straight. Oh, sorry.
You could just keep going. I love it. I mean, I could sit and listen to someone talking about the brain and neuroscience forever because it's quite fascinating. And that's something for you that's probably really wonderful to see. Just the amount of changes that's happened in neuroscience and the ability to look at the last decade has been explosive, right?
Huge. Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, the things we've learned, and it's quite interesting as a neuroscience student, because I started studying neuroscience again 20 years ago. I went to, when I went to university, I was doing neuroscience. I read it back then. And it's really interesting to see how all the many things that we were taught as kind of dogmatic in a way, this is just the way it is, period, turned out to be actually incorrect. And it's really like, whoa, it's like the brain no longer grows after adolescence, right? This is something that was just ingrained in us from the minute you start studying, like neuroscience 101, first class. Neurons do not grow after adolescence, and it turns out they actually do.
That's kind of a big one, that one.
Yeah, it is pretty big. Another huge misconception is that the brain is in charge of the rest of the body, but it's just very minimally affected by the other organs. And I think that there are two very big discoveries that really challenge that notion. Number one is the microbiome. How now everybody knows that the bacteria in your gut have a really strong impact on the health of your brain, which was considered unthinkable until maybe, I would say 10 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, I don't know.
Right.
And now we have been showing time and time again that your hormones also have a really huge impact on brain health. So as a woman, your ovaries are actually key to brain aging, which is quite shocking, honestly. I was very surprised when we found that. I was like, well, we're doing something wrong for sure. It's impossible. But we kept replicating. And I think it's now clear that your sex hormones are not just involved in fertility and reproduction, but also in brain function and especially brain aging in women.
Yeah, well,
so much to learn.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the whole thing. Forever a student, right? It just goes to show how there's so much interconnectedness, relationships with the different parts of the body that it's honestly impossible to isolate any just one thing when you look at it.
Yeah, and then I was talking to my colleagues and my students the other day, and I'm heavily invested in women's brains and Alzheimer's because, for me, I'm very vertical in the way I work. So I go really, really deep in one direction. I really want to, that's what I want to understand. But I was telling them if I had limitless time and unlimited resources, I would really look at these invisible connections between the brain and the rest of us, because I have a theory that any insult to the rest of the body leaves a mark in your brain. That's my working model, and I would love to be able to really test it more in depth, because it's never really been done. Like if you have an amputation, for example, for whatever reason, your brain suffers because of the loss of a limb. How severe is that scar, if you will, in your brain? Can you actually see a change inside the functionality of your brain as a result of it? And neuropsychology studies and some anatomical studies say yes, but I want to study that in vivo. And not just that, I mean, any form of serious change in your body impacts your brain as well. So that's what I would love to do, maybe when I'm like 60, 70 later.
Well, I mean, you're definitely a pioneer in this field for sure. And then we were talking before about how much has changed within the last decade. I mean, it's just, it's exponential now. It just kind of seems like it in the next 5 to 10, who knows what we're going to be. It's going to be interesting to me to see, because science is ever changing with what we learn, of how many other things that we thought were correct and what unquote dogma that they call it, that is incorrect. Right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So
The more you know, the less you know.
I know. Right?
It's incredible. It's
Yeah.
incredible.
Very humbling, right?
Yes.
So when you focused, I'm curious, when you focused on, studying the women's brains, I mean, is there a fundamental difference at all between a woman's brain and a man's brain?
It depends on on who you ask. There are many theories on how women's brains are different from men's brains, and some are purely based on sociology or psychology. I'm not really an expert in that. What I really look at is physiology and neurology and the raw biological differences between women's brains and men's brains. And I can tell you, yes, there are actual, objective, measurable, and visible even differences that are, however, subtle. So I gave a TED talk just a few months ago about our work. And I opened up with a picture of Barbie and a piece of Lego to just make the point that there is no such thing as a gendered brain. Pink and blue, Barbie and Lego, secretary and businessman, these are all social constructs. This is just marketing. It's got nothing to do with our actual brain physiology. That said, there are some differences in the way that our brains develop from the very moment of conception, which is not a sexist thing to say. It's just reality. We're born differently. Our DNA is somewhat different, right? Women come with 2 X chromosomes, which is the title of my book, The XX Brain. And boys carry an X and Y chromosome. And then, of course, we can talk about gender and transgender and all these wonderful things, but just bottom line, DNA varies by 1 chromosome. It's either XX or XY. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that the X and Y chromosome are actually different structurally, morphologically, and also in terms of size. Like the X brain is so much bigger than the X chromosome is so much bigger than the Y chromosome. It carries 1,098 genes as compared to the 78 genes of the Y chromosome. So women carry 1,000 more genes than men just when we're born. And many of these genes are involved with reproduction, but also with brain function, which is further proof of how the two are so tightly connected. And these different DNA patterns obviously encode for different protein synthesis and different hormonal production and different enzymatic production, which means that a woman's brain develops in a way that is slightly different from a boy's brain. For example, women's brains are very rich in estrogen receptors from the moment of conception, right? Because we have more estrogens than men, whereas men have more testosterone than women. So women's brains are loaded with these receptors, which are like little things that find your estrogens and use the estrogen like a lock and a key to then trigger a number of reactions inside your brain. A boy's brain is loaded with androgen receptors for testosterone, which is more abundant. And what these hormones have in common is that they're very energizing for the brain. They really support cellular metabolism, which is what happens in your cells everywhere in your brain and body when you need to produce energy, right? So the brain in particular relies on glucose, which is a simple sugar, for energy production. And the more estrogen you have in your brain, the more testosterone you have in your brain as a boy, and the more estrogen you have in your brain as a girl or a woman, the more your neurons will work harder and harder to burn this sugar, this glucose, to make energy. So these sex hormones are actually energy hormones as well. They really boost your energy production in the brain. Now, that would be just fantastic if women didn't go through menopause in midlife.
Right.
Right? Because in midlife, we lose that particular form of estrogen, estradiol, which is the most energizing of all forms. There are different forms of estrogens. There are 3 different forms. And estradiol is by far the most potent. And women lose it, sometimes in our 30s, sometimes in our 40s, sometimes in our 50s. If you're really lucky, 60, but it's less than 1% of the population. Whereas for men, the decline in testosterone is very slow and very gradual over time, so much so that many men are still fertile in their 70s and 80s. You know, so the same way that your metabolism slows down during menopause as a woman, so does your brain.
Yeah. So is that one of the reasons why you typically find the Alzheimer's hitting the female population more?
That's one of our theories. We show that it's not just the women live longer than men, but women also develop Alzheimer's disease related changes in their brains earlier with a younger age than men, and specifically during the transition to menopause. It looks like the menopause, because of the loss of this very strong hormone estradiol, which is energizing and is also really involved with the immune system. It really boosts your immune system as well. It promotes growth and plasticity, because we've learned that your brain actually keeps growing a little bit also later on during adulthood. And once you lose the estradiol, you lose all these functionalities. And for some women, that seems to be a very delicate time, in that your brain starts aging faster, the same way that your skin starts aging faster a little bit, or your hair gets a little bit drier. Not for all women, just for some women, right? Something similar happens in your brain as well. Your neurons start aging a little bit faster. And for some women, that seems to trigger deposition of amyloid plaques in the brain. So there seems to be a connection for women between the loss of hormones during menopause and the onset of Alzheimer's disease, which may seem like horrible news. However, it's not for all women. So I think it's important to say that not all women who go through menopause develop Alzheimer's plaques, and not all women with Alzheimer's plaques develop dementia. So we really need to better understand the dynamics there, and the prevalence and the probabilities. You know, we just showed it. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done.
Well, there's so much there, right? Do they find that they know what the cause is for the buildup of the amyloid plaques in proteins? I know there's a lot of work these days about the glymphatic system. And
yes, that's a really good point. I think it's really at the cellular level, because estrogen promotes the formation of a form of amyloid that is very easily removed from your brain and your system. Whereas lack of estrogen pushes the metabolism of amyloid towards the fibrillar form. In other words, nobody ever asked me this. Actually, just the first time somebody asked. So what happens is that your brain, as you get older, naturally forms some amyloid peptides. And amyloid is the protein that sometimes clumps together to form Alzheimer's plaques. There are different ways to cut this protein. One way that is fine, your body doesn't have a hard time just getting rid of it. And another way that makes the amyloid protein longer and stickier. And that increases your probability of that clumping and creating plaques. So if you have estrogen in your system, you're more likely to produce the good form, or the form that is easily removed. Whereas the loss of the hormone seems to correlate with a shift towards the dangerous form of the amyloid protein.
I see.
Yes.
So where would the role then of because how much is involved with estrogen? There's a lot to be said through hormones and neurotransmitters through other organs, right? Like the gut and the liver, things like that. So they're seeing correlations between the function there and the neurodegenerative disorders.
Right. So this is something that I think deserves more exploration. There is, I don't know, we don't know for sure. There's definitely a correlation between the health of the gut for example, and immunity and hormonal production. So I think this is one of the things that we want to look into, that we're interested in exploring further. Like we know that there's a connection between hormonal health and brain health. We know that there's a connection between gut health and brain health. We know that there's a connection between gut health and hormonal health. So it just makes sense that as the systems are changing, your brain might change accordingly, but it really needs to be explored.
Yeah. So where would
so much needs to be done.
I know, right? Where does the role of hormone replacement therapy fall into making some changes?
Well, so that would be the most logical answer, right? If losing your hormones is such a big deal, why don't we just give them back to you in the form of hormonal replacement therapy? And the answer is complicated, and people have tried with the Women's Health Initiative a long time ago, and they failed and showed that a specific hormonal formulation actually increases the risk of dementia in women. And that led to total panic. Basically, something happened in 2003 when these big clinical trials were stopped, because it turned out that women who were taking the hormones had a much higher risk of heart disease and stroke, breast cancer, and dementia as compared to women who were not taking the hormones. Now, that led to so many women just going cold turkey on hormones, just interrupting therapy, doctors panicking, lots of lawsuits, pharmaceutical development also stopped. So for a long time, we kind of went back to the Middle Ages, right? We just didn't know, didn't want to know, nobody was looking into it. More recently, scientists have been going back to the data and showed that, yes, it's true that if you start taking hormones after menopause, more than 6 years after menopause, that doesn't seem to help you, but could potentially harm you, especially your brain. For the heart, it's more like if you start more than 10 years post menopause, seems to be bad for your heart as well. There are 2 new clinical trials that were done in women who were within 6 years of menopause and showed no particular effects on the brain. So there was no obvious harm, but also no obvious improvement in cognitive performance or the pressure or some other things, although the hot flashes got a lot better. But all that said, we don't know if starting hormonal therapy prior to menopause or closer to menopause could actually lead to a positive effect. But something we do know is that hormonal replacement therapy is really helpful for women who go through menopause because of surgery. So there seems to be a strong effect of age, right? How far you are from menopause on either side, and whether or not menopause is natural or surgically induced. So for women who receive a hysterectomy, and more so an oophorectomy, which is the surgical removal of the ovaries prior to menopause, we know that there's a higher risk of dementia later on in life, which is something that no OBGYN seems to be aware of, or, OBGYN surgeon. But what studies have shown is that if you do receive the surgery and you start hormonal replacement therapy right after surgery, and you keep taking the hormones until broadly your natural age of menopause, then the risk is back to normal levels. So I think this is important information for women who do receive the surgery. Hormonal therapy seems to really help those patients. So I summarized 20 years of work in like 2 minutes, and I'm sure this is not clear, but I do explain it very thoroughly in the book. There's a whole chapter about the do's and don'ts of hormonal therapy, who really benefits and who doesn't benefit, and everything else in between that we're just not sure about.
Yeah, that's because when you talk hormones, you could go on forever, right? There's such an interaction, and it's highly individual. I'm gathering from this with each person who, I don't know if we know this yet, but it's safe to say that maybe because everybody is so different, there may be different contributing factors to someone developing Alzheimer's. It's not like just check this box and then you're going to get it.
For sure. For sure. I think hormones are one part of the puzzle. There's definitely some genetic background, which is not deterministic. Like what I learned from so many years of working in Alzheimer's disease is that there are two forms of Alzheimer's that we know of. There's an early onset form that is genetically determined, and there are genetic mutations in at least 1 or 3 genes that can cause it. However, early onset means that you develop dementia in your 40s and 50s, so very early on in life. And then there's a late onset form where the onset is more around age 65, 70 or afterwards, that is not genetically determined. So there are no genetic mutations that we know of that can cause it. And the risk is much more likely to be multifactorial. There's your lifestyle, there's your medical health. There's also your genetic background, but not in terms of genes causing disease or genes making you sick, as much as some genes increasing your likelihood and other genes decreasing your likelihood as well. Some genes are protective, some genes are more, aggressive in terms of increasing risk. So there's a whole number of things. There are so many different things that intervene, and we're trying to understand them better. Sex being one of those. We don't have a lot of information of how being men or women could potentially impact our risk of Alzheimer's. The research really needs to be done.
Yeah, so would that be the field that people call epigenetics then, the environmental?
Yeah,
factors?
yes, that would be epigenetics, and it really speaks to how your lifestyle and everything that happens to you in your life can potentially increase or reduce your risk of dementia later on in life, which I find incredibly fascinating and also really good news, right? That there are so many things that we can do and probably should do to take care of our brains as part of our self-care.
Yeah. So what are I know there's so much in the book to discuss, but I know you mentioned that you've learned so much over the last several years in general. I mean, what are some of the revelations that are in the book that came to light over the last several years, in relationship to things that we know now that we didn't know then? Because I know one is that I think recently they were really excited in research to try this new Alzheimer's drug, and it ended up not doing anything, and it was like a crushing blow to what they suspected.
It was really upsetting. All the clinical trials of immunization, all the vaccines for Alzheimer's failed so far, which is a huge bummer. In so many ways, it's really huge. But I think it's also really important because it's really saying we're going after the wrong targets. I think because if vaccinating against amyloid was the way to go, we would know probably by now. And I think that really helped the field take risks. Because what's been happening is that for so many years, everybody was just like amyloid. We need to see the amyloid. We need to measure the amyloid. We need to get rid of the amyloid. And now it's like, but maybe not. maybe something else needs to happen as well. And I think something that is really mind-blowing for me as an Alzheimer's scientist and as a brain scientist is the understanding and the general acknowledgement, almost general, that Alzheimer's is actually largely preventable in many cases. Like when I started, again, a really long time ago, the general mindset was that once you get Alzheimer's, that's it. There's nothing you can do about it, and it's quite inevitable. You do get Alzheimer's. It comes from either getting older or bad genes in your DNA or a combination of the two, but you have no power. Right, that was what I landed into. Like, oh, wow, So what do we do if I have no power to stop it? What you try to prevent it? And is prevention feasible for Alzheimer's disease? And I can tell you, like, so many people still today would say, absolutely not. That's ridiculous. But many people.
Really?
Oh, for sure. Oh my God. We had this paper that we published in December showing the results of our clinical trial at the Alzheimer's Prevention Clinic at Weill Cornell, where Dr. Isaacson, who's the director of the clinic, I'm associate director, and he's a magician. I don't know how he does it. He just look at your legs and tell you if you have a specific gene or not. It's incredible. But when I saw him do it, I was like, what are you doing? Because what's happening? That's ridiculous. And then it was like 100% accuracy.
Wow.
I was like, this is incredible. I don't know how you do it, but of course, keep doing it. But so in the title, we used the word prevention. And that created such an uproar with the reviewers, the people who were reviewing the paper, that I think eventually the word prevention was changed to risk reduction.
I see.
Because people agree that there are things that you can do to reduce risk, but we don't know if you are in fact preventing Alzheimer's disease. So there's a whole semantic argument that we need to address on a daily basis. But I do believe that prevention is feasible. There are many studies showing that at the very least 1/3 of all Alzheimer's cases could potentially be prevented by engaging in practices that really modify your epigenetic risks, like you said, and that capitalize on lifestyle medicine and preventative medicine. And it's an interesting field because it's very close to wellness field.
Mm-hmm.
It can do borders on health and wellness, which is not strictly medicine and science. So there's a subtle line that you want to never cross into the other territory. But I think there's so much that has been shown by like accurate, rigorous research in terms of what your lifestyle and your medical report card can really add to your health, and especially in terms of preventing a number of diseases that attack the brain, especially Alzheimer's.
Are there some fundamental ones that have resonated with you that you share with people?
Yes, all of them in the book for sure. There are many, and I think they're very personal as well, because I can tell you that diet and exercise are super important, but maybe you eat healthily already, maybe you exercise every day. So then it's stress reduction, so important for brain health, and we never talk about stress. It's something that could potentially increase your risk of Alzheimer's disease, especially as a woman, right? Because we now know that your hormones work in balance with your stress, literally. So cortisol, the main stress hormone, is in balance with your estrogen, because your body uses the same molecule to make both. So if your body needs to make more cortisol, it needs to reduce the production of estrogens or testosterone to make room for the cortisol. But when cortisol goes down, your body can resume producing your hormones accordingly. So that's really important to know, because we don't want to go through earlier menopause because of stress, right? We don't want to have hormonal issues because of stress, because our brains will suffer as well. And there's this incredible study that looked at brain scans done with MRI scans and showed that high cortisol levels in midlife, or let's say chronic stress levels, really correlate with poor memory function already in midlife, and also brain shrinkage. However, while the memory decline was observed in both men and women suffering from very high stress levels, the brain shrinkage was only found in women who were post-menopause.
Interesting.
Yes. Well, scary. I mean, we're all stressed, right? So I think it's really important to acknowledge that stress can change the physiology of your brain in a way that is dangerous and harmful for your cognitive performance, but also your brain itself. It changes the morphology of your brain in a negative way. So you don't want that. And so, so many people are stressed. We're in the middle of a pandemic. So that's a good enough reason to be stressed out. But it's really important to look at stress reduction techniques as something that can also benefit your brain health.
Yeah, because everybody has stress, right? Just that incessant, never-ending stress. And it's been interesting to see how that's been linked to just a lot of the body beginning to contributing to quote unquote autoimmune diseases. And I loved how you put the word personal in there, because sometimes it might be stressful for people to do something that they personally don't resonate with, right?
Yes. Yes.
They would like to do something else.
Yes, I find it so interesting. As a scientist, I'll be honest, I'm a bit of a nerd. I don't spend a lot of time looking at pop culture. I don't even have a TV, honestly. And so when I started working more in a lifestyle preventative medicine field, and I had to talk to people about that, I found that there's so much confusion. And I think science is really kind of, marketing is trumping all over science in so many different ways. There are products that are being branded as brain boosting supplements for no reason whatsoever. No clinical trials have been done, but they sell so much money. I think the health and wellness industry may have the best intentions, but a lot of these products have no scientific validity. And so many people will just jump on the bandwagon or go on very extreme diets just because somebody says, you have to try this, And I think as a scientist, I'm much more in favor of time-tested strategies that have not been decided by somebody sitting at a computer, but have been tested in at least large-scale observational studies, obviously clinical trials at best, but hard to do them, or at least over time. Like, I believe in tradition a lot. And I find it fascinating how there are little things that, like, my mom used to say to me, just totally because her mom used to say to her, they turned out to be really scientifically valid, like having a cup of warm milk with honey before going to bed. I don't know, is it something you guys do in the States?
Warm milk before bed with honey?
Yeah.
No, honestly, that I've never heard of in the United States.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Oh, interesting. Well, it's all over Europe.
But it's not in my realm, but it doesn't mean it doesn't exist either.
Right. So in Europe, I'm from Italy, and that's something you do all the time. When you have a little kid, you just give them like a glass of warm milk with honey mixed into to say this is going to make you sleep like an angel. Come un angeletto. That's what my mom used to say to me. But it turns out that it's true, because the milk contains tryptophan, which is the protein, the amino acid that your brain needs to make serotonin. Serotonin is the neurotransmitter that makes you sleep. But tryptophan, for some reason, has a hard time getting inside the brain because it competes with a lot of different amino acids. And scientists at MIT actually found that if you mix the source of tryptophan with a simple sugar, a simple carbohydrate like honey, that somehow really pushes the tryptophan up inside your brain. Yeah.
Look at that. Well, it's like mom's always right.
Always. Mom. Yeah.
Just ask mom.
Moms know best. Yes, for sure. But there are so many things that I find to be so much more interesting than necessarily the latest trend. Right?
Yeah.
Because at least centuries of women or generations and generations of moms have tested the fact that the kids actually sleep when you give them milk and honey. So I find that really endearing, and I really want solid science and rigorous research, especially because there's so much confusion around women's health as well as brain aging and Alzheimer's risk and lifestyle. Oh my God. So I think we really need a lot of science.
And plus, correct me if I'm wrong, because I mean, you're definitely immersed in the world of research more than I am. I mean, had the majority of these studies and publications been done and they were like 99.9% men-based brains
Yes.
they were studying?
Yes. So my field is quite, it needs a revamping, like a strong one. So for a really long time, medical studies were carried out on male subjects until about 1994, which is when the NIH said this has to stop, women have to be included in research. And I refer to that in the book as bikini medicine, which is really how historically medical professionals and scientists believed that men and women were essentially the same person with different reproductive organs, the parts of the body that would fit under a bikini. And that meant that when looking at brains, it was totally fine to look at the men's brain because the assumption was that the woman's brain was exactly the same thing, perhaps a little smaller, but the functionality was the same. And that's a problem in so many different ways. But also now that scientists actually have to include both men and women in studies, unless there's a reason not to do that. But even now, studies then just lump men and women together, right? They don't separate the groups. They just put them all in the same cohort, in the same little pot, and then use statistical procedures to adjust by sex, is what we say, obviously, to kind of remove the effects of sex from the equation. So for centuries or for decades, we had studies that were entirely male-based, right? They had no women in the studies. And now we're still behaving, or not me, because I separate them, but the vast majority of studies still behave as if women and men were essentially indistinguishable, except, there's some ovaries in there. So medical, neurological research and psychiatric research in some ways have been really biased in that women were not informing research the way we should and the way we could have done. And so, I'm a strong proponent of gender medicine where the sexes are separated in studies, which, to be fair, is super hard to do. Because you need to have to look at the same, if you're looking for something, you need to have twice the amount of people, right? Because you have to have a big group of men and a big group of women, twice the amount of time and twice the amount of money. So this is something that many scientists would love to be able to do. I'm thrilled that I'm able to do it, but I'm also very much aware that gender medicine needs to become a priority for the NIH and funding agencies, because it's not just, these bad scientists, they're not looking at gender differently. It's like, well, I don't have the money to do it. I would love to. There's just no money. So it's a whole system that needs to wake up a little bit.
Well, hopefully that'll change with seeing that how certain things gravitate more towards men, which I think Parkinson's disease does, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. Yeah. Parkinson's, the prevalence is higher in men, and ADHD is higher in men.
Yeah. But so now they're finding that.
Serial killers.
Yeah.
More men are serial killers. Yes. But I think it would be incredibly valuable.
Right, because that would kick my mind off of why would this person get this and this person get that, and maybe it'll open it up. And I want to tie into one of your other books because there's a phrase in there that stuck out with me, and I love that book too. It's Brain Food: The Surprising Science of Eating for Cognitive Power, Eating for Your Brain, which is a huge concept for me when I came across it, because I was just eating so I could look good in the mirror for most of my life. And I think most people are, but you kick off that chapter talking about neuronutrition. And I wanted you, if you could just mention what you mean by neuronutrition and the role that might play in the XX for women.
Yes, so neuronutrition is the science of how the nutrients that we obtain from the foods we eat can actually impact brain function. And the glass of milk with honey is a really good example of that, right? We don't know that there's an amino acid called tryptophan that the brain needs to make serotonin, which is what makes us sleep, right? So I've always been super interested in food. I'm Italian. So food has always been, food and nutrition and diet has always been a huge part of my life. You know, like even just family dinners revolve around these enormous displays of food, and kids learn to cook when they're like 4 or 5 years old. Everybody knows how to cook. Everybody's quite specific about good food and bad food. Nobody would touch processed food, by the way. And then I moved to New York. I was 23, I think, when I moved to New York.
That's a little different. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, that was shocking. That was really shocking. I could not recognize the flavors of the food. I had a really hard time until I found farmers markets.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay, I'm home. Good. But, you know, they're expensive. And I was a PhD student, and I was like, why is it that good, healthy food needs to be a privilege for people who can afford it? It's just not fair. It's not like that in Italy, for sure, even now. But yes, so neuronutrition is really the study of how diet can so profoundly change the functionality of the brain, and how food is not just food. I think the bottom line is food is not just food. Food is function, and food is information. And as a society, we are aware that the foods we eat will change the way we look, right? And whether or not we'll fit in our genes or not. But we're much less aware, or perhaps less comfortable with the thought that the foods we eat also change the way we think, the way we feel, the way we judge things, right? So our food can really change our brains as well. And that is brain food. And brain food is more unisex in terms of things that have been found to work for men and women in terms of diet and nutrition. And really, I really just try to explain how these nutrients and the foods that we get the nutrients from can impact brain health. In the XX Brain, I went through all the studies. I mean, I summarized them obviously, but all the studies that looked at nutrition specifically for women, for women's brains, and what kind of foods and nutrients are really supportive of women's brain health. And, you know,
What are some of the ones that are powerful for a woman's brain?
I would say antioxidants are really important. I would say antioxidants, polyunsaturated fatty acids, and phytonutrients, phytoestrogens. So antioxidants are really important because we know that our energy levels change starting when we're 35 years old, sometimes a little later. And antioxidants are a great way to boost brain energy levels and reduce oxidative stress and inflammation, which is a major cause of cellular aging, especially in the brain. Antioxidants, the most important ones, according to research, are vitamin C and vitamin E. They're very easy to find. Vitamin C are found in dark leafy greens and citrus fruits like lemons, oranges, grapefruits. Goji berries are a really good source, and most berries, from blueberries. Blackberries are very rich in antioxidants, strawberries, raspberries. Vitamin E comes from a number of nuts and seeds, like almonds are really a nice source. Flax seeds are even better. Extra virgin olive oil is a very good source as well. So basically plant-based foods, veggies, fruits, nuts, seeds, to some extent, they're rich in antioxidants. Polyunsaturated fats are fats that your brain really needs and craves, but is not able to make on its own. So we need to import them from the diet, especially omega-3 fatty acids. And one type of omega-3 that is called DHA. That is the most prevalent brain fat. It's found in 70% of all cellular membranes in the brain, which means that the brain really needs it for scaffolding, but also for functionality, for synaptic transmission. And DHA comes from fish, is the best source, especially smash. fish. So it's sardines, mackerel, anchovies, salmon, herring. So it's fatty fish, cold water fatty fish, smash. That's the best source. For vegans and vegetarians or people who don't like fish, there are plant-based sources of omega-3s, not DHA, but omega-3s, especially a type of omega-3 that is called ALA, that can go inside your brain and then the brain converts it to DHA. The problem is, and the reason we need to be a little bit careful with that, up to 75% of ALA is lost in the conversion. So if you want to consume, let's say, 2 grams of DHA a day, which studies have shown to be the minimum needed by your brain to really thrive, then you really have to consume 3-4 times as much ALA. Okay? So like 8 to 10 grams a day to get 2 grams of DHA, which is hard to do. It's very hard to do.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking about, at least here, you know, you mentioned New York, I'm thinking about the average Western American diet. I mean, you find not real food anywhere. So you're not getting it from the natural side. And then the brains from excess stress and everything, it's just building up and building up. And do you see a place for supplementation? Are you into using supplements if necessary?
Yes. Yeah, for sure. I think the best thing anyone can do is to get tested. Don't just take random supplements. You may not need them. You know, sometimes you can even reach toxicity because of too much of certain things. So my recommendation is to get tested. You can do a blood test, measure your levels of antioxidants. You can measure your vitamin C, your ascorbic acid. Vitamin E is called tocopherol. You can measure your polyunsaturated fatty acids, the omega-3 to omega-6 profile. If you have any deficiencies or if your values are on the low end of the spectrum, then obviously the best thing to do is to change your diet. If for practical reasons or medical reasons you can't change your diet, then I think the supplements might be helpful.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm looking into that right now because I'm actually plant-based at the moment, and I'm very concerned about DHA in my diet. So I've been measuring my daily intake of all the foods I eat to make sure I have enough of these omega-3 fatty acids. And I find one little tip is that flax oil is awesome, especially the good quality cold pressed, but pretty much all of it. I mean, as long as it's unrefined. 1 tablespoon of flax oil contains up to 8 grams of ALA. Wow. So you're almost there with the DHA. Just 1 tablespoon. And so I make a point of having this flax oil with my salads every day, 1 tablespoon. And then I don't need to take supplements. DHA.
One of the biggest takeaways for me in general was when I was suffering a pretty severe amount of brain fog for a long period of time. When I just started to do some of the stress reduction techniques and things you mentioned and the nutrition techniques, I could notice some changes that happened with my brain pretty fast. And here's the thing that was, I don't think I would have, tell me if this makes sense or not, but I think I got to a point where my brain just kind of deteriorated so much that if I could do just something that helped it, wow, that's a huge difference, as opposed to before. It's almost like the slow decline that you don't know what you don't know until you're right past a certain point, which kind of ties back into what we said with the slow onset that people have over the years, that they just look at, I'm just starting to forget things. It's no big deal. It's just part of getting old type thing.
What helped you most with the brain fog?
Yeah, actually, you know, a lot of it is a phrase that I use all the time, is because I did the opposite, where I was just doing too much of things at one time. Like, this is supposed to be good for your brain or your gut, so I'd take like 50 things and it was just an overload. And a lot of it was, I found it wasn't so much what I started doing, but what I stopped doing. So I stopped doing a lot of things that were causing that, and then added just a few other things in. So I reversed what most people do, is just let me start adding all this other different stuff in, as opposed to checking what you're doing. So it's just a change of habit. And another one is I stopped eating for what I call fitness nutrition, and was eating for my physiology, my brain in general.
Right.
And another huge one, which you touched on in that book, was I was chronically dehydrated, didn't even know it.
Huh. So many people tell me that. Of all the things I discussed in brain food, the one thing that really resonated with most people was water, and the importance of water and hydration for the brain. Because it is true that one of the major causes of brain fog is dehydration. We just don't know that we're dehydrated, but even just mild dehydration can really increase the risk of neurological symptoms, from dizziness and brain fog, confusion, reduced attention, just low energy and fatigue. And so many people just don't know that they're mildly dehydrated. So I have this little trick that I always recommend, which is to fill up a bottle of water with warm water, like 2 liters, like the one I normally drink in the morning alone, and then just sip one water, like small sips, very slowly, like 1 sip every 10 seconds. Keep going, keep going. If at some point that actually feels good and you want more, it means that you're dehydrated, and that you're slowly hydrating to a point where your brain feels a relief. And then you just want to drink the whole bottle. So that's a good test. And another trick is to drink a glass of warm water first thing in the morning. Because usually we're dehydrated in the morning, but instead of drinking just water, people drink coffee, which is dehydrating,
right,
or tea, which is also dehydrating, or a little bit, or juice, which is a ton of sugar, which is also dehydrating. So warm water first thing in the morning is really helpful. And the reason to drink warm water instead of cold is that warm water is vasodilating, whereas cold water is vasoconstricting. So if you want to promote absorption, I can't say that in English, assorbimento, your intake of fluids and electrolytes, you want your veins to be dilated. So you want warm water to really improve hydration and be hydrated faster.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that was going to be my follow-up question, because honestly, that's something that I discovered from my last several years of being able to travel the world and teach. I'm from the US, my thing was, okay, why is everybody drinking warm water? Where's the ice? No,
right.
The US is like one of the only ones that does that.
Yes. Well, that was one of my challenges when I moved to New York, is that I just could not find water. You go to stores and it's in the freezer or in the refrigerator, which I don't want it to be cold. Why would you drink it cold? Or what you find is basically it's either Evian and it's like $9 per bottle, or it's something purified. And purified water, yes, it's what? It's H2O, but doesn't have the electrolytes that actually promote the hydration. You need both. You need the fluids and you need the electrolytes and minerals and salts that give you the hydration if combined. Like your brain doesn't just need something wet. There has to be a nutritional value to the water. So that was interesting to me. And then I ended up getting a water filter in the house.
Nice.
So now, it's now purified. The water is just clean. And then you can drink it straight, like tap water that actually has the electrolytes and the minerals and salts.
Oh, I love that. I think you just gave me one of my favorite quotes I'm going to use. The brain doesn't need something that's just wet.
Right.
Hello. Like, it's got to be something to the water as well. Nutrients in the water.
Yeah, because we don't think of water as food just because it's liquid, but it's actually food, and it is one of the most important brain foods, if not the number one. Like you can live with no food at all for a really long time, but you can't survive for more than, I'm going to say, 5 days without water. Right? Your body just starts shutting down. You get seizures, you have all these issues. So keep hydrated.
That's a big one. And if you don't mind, I know we're running out of time, but I just wanted to ask you one follow-up question. I wasn't planning on asking it, but one of the phrases I tell people is that something similar to that. I mean, you can, without food, you can live a pretty long time,
Right.
without water, but without oxygen, you're in big trouble. And
yes.
we know the brain needs that glucose and the oxygen. I mean, what's the role of oxygen and how to change oxygen in the brain in relationship to possibly for the neurodegeneration or Alzheimer's?
It's through blood flow. So the best way to improve oxygenation in the brain is obviously to have a clean brain. Number one, your brain needs to be able to burn it efficiently. So the antioxidants are really important because they reduce the oxidative stress that turns the oxygen into free radicals. And then you need to have really good blood flow. So circulation is really important. And there's this saying that the health of the heart is the health of the brain. And it's really true that, again, everything is connected. So if your heart is not healthy, your circulation will be affected and your brain functionality will be affected because the brain relies on blood flow for pretty much everything. All the nutrients get in with blood. All the oxygen is carried by red blood cells, and your lymphocytes are in the blood. And so I think taking care of the heart is one of the big risk reduction strategies in dementia as well, because so many cases are not just Alzheimer's. There's very often a vascular component on top of that. So the vasculature of your brain is also impacted, and that can create so many issues. Yeah,
hence the role of getting much more movement in general in your life and physical exercise, right?
Yes, which is so hard to do in lockdown.
Yeah.
Right, when you're stuck in the house. Like, I used to be very active, and now I struggle because I have a little girl at home. We have no help whatsoever. And I'm working. So any minute that I'm not working, I'm with her, I'm not going to be working on. I mean, I'm going to play with dolls and having tea parties. And so I see that so many people have a hard time just keeping on top of their exercise and physical activity. I personally have been doing yoga because I can do it by myself. I can do it with her. I can do it when she's playing. If I have 20 minutes, I can just do my yoga. And it's also good stress relief therapy. And, anything else that works for you, whether it's planking. I've been planking a lot because you can't do it anyway for longer than 5, 6, 7, 10 minutes. I know how long you plank. For me, it's the limit. Yeah. But that's really helpful. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, but
just a little movement break. Yeah.
I envy people who can actually still exercise. Like I could, but I can't because I'm a mom.
Yeah.
And I'm working as well. So
yeah. Play is a great form of movement too, especially when you're with your kid. Hopefully sometimes it's kind of stressful, right? But other than that, and she didn't come through the door either. So
she hasn't, not yet. I heard steps though, going back and forth.
It's like, is mommy almost done? I think she's done. So, Doc, thank you so much for coming on. It really was wonderful. I know I kept it a little bit longer than I told you.
Don't worry.
Such a good
time.
No stress. So I know probably people get the book from Amazon and things like that, but please tell them where they can get more information from you. There's the book right there, XX Brain, and then any other resources you want to direct them to. So I don't do Twitter, but I am active on Instagram. And my handle is Dr. Dr_Mosconi, Mosconi. People spell it M-A and then they can't find me. So Instagram is a good way to reach out to me for sure. My website is also a good way to be in touch, more like for newsletters or personal emails. And it's www.lisamosconi.com. Either way. And I actually reply. So Instagram or my website. Absolutely. And everybody listening, I will put links up for her Instagram and website as well, because I I do follow you on Instagram. I'm on there probably an unhealthy amount, but
What's your handle? I didn't know that.
Stop Chasing Pain.
Oh, then we are connected then. Great.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. So I check out your stuff all the time. And of course, everyone who's listening, please make sure you pick up the book, and then both books, I'll put links to those as well. And keep up the wonderful work, Doctor. You're making as Steve Jobs said, he just wants to try to make a ding in the universe, and you're definitely doing that.
Thank you. I hope so.
Much love. You stay safe out there.
You too.
Okay. Bye.
Okay. Bye.